What's up, my movers and shakers? I'm Dave. This is Michael Chump Change. This is Hector. This is
the unmatched Gav Thorpe.
This is
industry legend Andy Chambers.
This is the painting phase room, but this is MS Paints, and today we've got another long boy, another chap show.
We do. It's been a while.
It's been a hot minute, hasn't it?
You may not know this, but we haven't done one of these since October?
Yeah, quite possibly.
We've been very busy, boys.
Yeah.
But we're excited to get it back going with a double guest. Our first double guest.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Double guest action in an alien space.
Yeah, it's all very new and exciting in here.
It's completely new. Yeah. We've definitely changed a lot of your settings on the cameras. So
yeah. If the people who own all of this kit are watching, I'm so sorry. I've been through all of your cameras, changed everything. I
can't believe we got it like this.
Yeah. Honestly, I was digging through trying to find stuff. Nightmare. But hey, we're here. We got it done.
We're here now.
If you're watching it all worked out just fine.
Yeah.
I feel it's incumbent that I should clarify that half the reason you're down here in the first place is because me and Gav couldn't be asked to travel up to you.
That's entirely fair.
Thanks for coming down, guys. We appreciate it.
Yeah,
it's all good.
I learned today that this area is called, what did you call it? The lead belt.
Lead belt.
This is the
Yeah,
lead
you're
belt,
down in
yes.
the Nottingham lead belt. You're here at the source.
Yeah.
Because this is where all of the games have sprung from. Is that the idea?
Well, yeah.
Or is that controversial?
Within a limited band. Tabletop miniatures games in the UK are certainly very centred around here and have been for decades. It's one of these self-sustaining things.
Yeah.
If you're making that kind of game, there's a lot of people that know how to make that kind of game around here, so you end up here.
Yeah, Dave was saying when he goes to all of these shows and he meets with people and he asks them where they're from, it's always here.
Somewhere around here, or Newark or Nottingham or Derby maybe, or somewhere in the
If they're not working for one of the bigger companies, they have a resin casting thing at the foot of their bed kind of thing. They're just, or in the shed, everyone around there seems to be doing something. We passed an army base earlier, I'm pretty sure they had guns to protect miniatures.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They're having a real full scale war game in there.
That's right. Yeah. So today we're kind of here to just have a chat. We're going to talk about your guys' new game, Zeogenesis, which I've covered a couple of times on the channel so far. And I think kind of for your benefit as well, just to clarify, mate, the audience watching this are going to be fuming when they find out that you have no idea who these guys are or what anything about this is.
Yeah, no, if you're...
privileged position.
If you're... Is that what
You're
this
in the
is?
presence
This
of
is like,
royalty, my
exactly,
man.
I've come in and I've
You
sat
are shown
down.
proper deference.
There are thousands of people watching this who would kill me dead to be sat where I'm sitting, and I'm just like, they seem like lovely gents. No, so yeah, for those of you who haven't seen me or this before, I'm basically here because I don't know anything at all. So I'm here to ask the silly questions that people who want to sit here probably wouldn't ask because they don't want to look silly, whereas I don't mind at all.
You're here because you have no shame.
That's basically it. Yeah, that's why Dave keeps me around. No shame at all. He can dress me up in whatever he wants and put me on the channel. It's all good.
That's happened before.
Yeah, not like that though, guys. Come on.
So I guess we will.
Yeah, I'd love to know who you are actually. Yeah. If you could introduce yourself to me, works.
Yes.
And for everyone else who also might not know.
Okay, I am Gav Thorpe. I am a writer and games developer, mostly. I started at Games Workshop in the design studio in 1993. I worked in the design studio in various capacities for 14 years. Sorry.
That's when I was born.
Oh, when you was born. Before I was born is too much. And so, I spent 14 years in the Games Workshop design studio. And then I've been freelance game design and writing novels and things for the last 17 years or whatever that is now.
Yeah. My name's Andy Chambers. I write books, I design games, do narrative world building, that kind of good stuff. I started out in 1990. March 1990. Before you were born. Three years before you were born. I am my first
and I'm 31 years old as well, so I'm not exactly a child.
Thanks for bringing
That's
that
okay.
up.
I like to just make sure we all know what's going on.
I'm feeling like Theoden here. Oh, yes. So I also did 14 years at Games Workshop, and after that I went and worked at Blizzard. Blizzard for... Mainly for StarCraft. I did a little bit of World of Warcraft, but mainly StarCraft while I was there. StarCraft 2, Winds of Liberty. After that, I went back and freelanced again. I freelanced briefly before working for Blizzard, but I went back to freelancing again, and I've been doing that now for Oh boy. 16 years. I'm actually slightly less experienced at freelancing than Gav is.
Freeloading. No, freelancing.
No, we know all about that.
It is the way.
not.
It's the way to do it.
As video professionals, that one thing I can absolutely relate with is the freelancing world.
I've been freelance for 20 years, so technically I'm the most
Well, that's
experienced
when I was
man at the
born.
table.
What? Forgive my ignorance, he says for the first time today.
We'll just take that as a cover.
When did Games Workshop get started? Was it already quite established by the time you two got in there?
Yeah, it started up in the 80s, didn't it?
Yeah, so again, for the quick précis, what we know as Games Workshop was originally two companies, Games Workshop and Citadel Miniatures.
Mm-hmm.
So Games Workshop was the retail side, and they started off importing D&D and then doing other sort of like what we'd think of as tabletop hobby games and role-playing games. And then Citadel Miniatures, which is where the lead belt we were talking about earlier, the lead belt comes from, we're based near here.
Yeah, because original Games Workshop's based down in London.
Yeah.
They were a London importer and shop down in London in Hammersmith.
Selling
Citadel
physical games.
was up here in Newark. You know.
Citadel forges the models kind of thing.
Yes.
They basically had nothing much to do with each other initially, because original Games Workshop was all about importing D&D, and they started making their own games, which is where Jervis Johnson comes into it, because he actually started designing games with them, and they all got other designs done as well.
People like Mark Gascoigne as well, you know, sort of.
But they were kind of parallel tracks a lot. Like, I don't know where the crossover first came. Do you know, Gav?
I'm not 100% sure.
through White Dwarf?
Yeah, I think it's like White Dwarf and just distribution and things like that. So, you know, Games Workshop, Citadel Miniatures, as it was, you know, employed some people like Rick Priestley and Richard Halliwell and things to create a game to sell their miniatures, which was the first Warhammer. In fact, actually, and their background was in like archaeology and writing their own games and stuff. But essentially the two merged. Well, technically Citadel bought Games Workshop, I believe. So Brian Ansell, who owned Citadel, bought Games Workshop, and the two companies merged. And for the longest time, of course, Citadel Miniatures was still the brand and Games Workshops were still the stores. And it's all become smooshed into Warhammer now.
Yes.
To be fair, I kind of understand.
I think it makes a lot of sense. As
but,
somebody from the outside walking around a high street and seeing Games Workshop didn't really mean anything to me.
I think that was the line, yeah. And I mean, back in the day when they first set up, that's what they were. They sold board games primarily, and, you know, role-playing games.
Chess
Not even really think, chess sets, literally.
Yeah. But it was odd to walk into a shop called Games Workshop and for it to be 100% Warhammer, because you would expect to be able to buy it.
They were all over it.
It's actually that. So so that was sort of like sort of late 80s ish, and then everybody at Games Workshop, sort of like the head office and all that, those that remained were sort of like moved up to Nottingham Midlands.
The Great Trek North.
Yeah.
Not all of them made it, basically. Which was primarily the guys who were producing White Dwarf down in London at the time. They transplanted. And the guys writing games, role-playing games and board games. I'll say not all of them came, but Jervis did. He was one of the ones who made the Great Trek up. He was very much a Londoner.
So, 1990 was sort of like just about that crossover. So the new Games Workshop was just started releasing like the big, what we think of as big box games.
Yeah, I was talking about this earlier on, because what got me in initially was like, it was 1988, around there, 87, 88, because they did Rogue Trader, and 40k miniatures as well, which was interesting. I was always into sci-fi. I used to be a big Asgard miniatures fan. Used to go down the Asgard store. That was in Nottingham. And they had Combat 3000, which was also Rick and Hal. But I'll be honest, it was a bit of a shonky system. It was hard work.
Which covers most of the systems back then, to be fair.
It was very, very, very fitting for an 80s system. Of like, okay, I'll try and have fun then.
Spreadsheets, pages.
Yeah, and I'll try and remember all these percentile modifiers that you've put in here. And of course, Rogue Trader's it's D6 based. It's all very thud and blunder, basically. So it was actually a lot of fun to play. But it was actually Adeptus Titanicus coming out, because I was quite poor at the time. So being able to get a box which had terrain, miniatures, templates, measuring sticks, dice, and rules all together,
Self-contained
as a package experience, and it be a good, fun, playable little game with a lot of replay value as well, was just fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And for me, that's what currently broke through on. Wow,
yeah.
And I started, following White Dwarf and stuff like that. And I say that's around 88, and around 90, I got my job at the studio, right on the cusp, as they were starting to make a lot more new things, basically.
Yeah, similar for me really. Was an older cousin of mine introduced me to like Warhammer and things like that, but actually it wasn't until Adeptus Titanicus came out that me and my regular gaming friend Dan, where I grew up in Stevenage, and there was a hobby store in the indoor market, which was great. It had like needlecraft stuff, but it had loads of models and things, particularly miniatures, not a model shop, but properly a miniatures shop, and had all the sort of like. I remember the particular day because me and my mate were in there, and we were almost bought what was then called the Devastator set, but the Devastator set wasn't Devastators as people think of it today. It was a thud gun,
A rapier,
and a mole mortar.
Right, that's right.
In one box.
Yep,
Okay.
Or there was this box of 6 Battle Titans in plastic.
Yeah.
And we're like, and of course we didn't quite twig of epic scale just then. So I had a picture of these Titans that were like, the person was this big in this thing. And we're thinking, how big? How did they get into a little box? And so we sort of like, because we didn't.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So, we've talked about scale in our first episode.
Yes.
And watching me trying to explain all the different ways people
small
do
and
scale.
far away.
Small and far away, but also scale modelling.
Yeah, we had a whole debate. I say debate. I sat nicely and listened as I was explained the difference
watched my eyes
between
cross.
scale modelling and what war because you have the was it heroic scale is what they do now, which is like big heads and hands but little bodies.
So epic scale that you're talking about is
6 mil. It was 6 mil scale. So 6 basically. A normal person was about 6 mil.
Yes.
So about 1 mil to 1 foot on miniature scale. I think I can't remember. It's like 8
Tiny.
scale. Or,
Yeah.
I love that.
You like that?
I like that a lot.
You get a lot of guys.
Micro machines.
Really, really teeny ones. You put them in your Hot Wheels, drive them around.
Yep, absolutely.
So the big old overpriced frightening Titan thing in Forge World?
Yes.
Basically, Adeptus Titanicus scaled that down to 6 mil, so your Titan was actually that big.
Oh, but you could fit a little man.
Yeah. And when you were obviously younger and saw a Titan in a box for what would have probably been about £8 back then, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I think there was 6. Yeah, I can't remember. 6 in a box for like £15 or something.
Yeah. It kind of blew your mind a little
And
bit.
we had 3. Yeah, and the weird thing was, I don't know whether it's a promotional thing or he'd done some box breaking or whatever, but the Dave who ran the shop said, "Oh, actually, I've got the rules for it and stuff." So it wasn't. We didn't have like the polystyrene terrain. But he had like a bagged up version of the rule book and the templates and everything else, which he just gave us for buying these Titans, basically. Yeah.
Maybe you just sold the buildings on to somebody.
Well, that's what I'm thinking.
Because those buildings were boss. They were absolutely marvellous. Styrene. Because they were experimenting with styrene around that time. They did Mighty Fortress a little while later.
I've got a Mighty Fortress.
You've seen one of those. Yeah. Have you ever seen the original Adeptus Titanicus epic buildings that they made?
I don't think so, no.
They're like 2 halves that clamp together, and they've basically just got skyscraper detail on the front, but they work really well. They look really great, and they're about the right size, and you get an instant battlefield with them that's amazing.
You know, there was the second edition Blood Bowl with the Psychostyrene board as well.
Yeah.
Still got that as well.
Yeah.
But styrene board has aged better than I have. It's incredible.
Absolutely. Yeah,
It's weird, isn't it? You think it would disintegrate over time.
There's a picture in an attic somewhere of that board.
Forgive my ignorance. Go on.
Styrene, like polystyrene?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, expanded polystyrene, but they're quite hard.
Yeah.
More
more
not
compressed,
expanded.
like the similar thing, but
Yeah.
Smaller balls, essentially.
Yeah.
And they do.
Well, not expanded is what it comes down to, because a lot of the reason you can actually squeeze stuff is because it's been expanded. If it's not expanded, then it's quite dense.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
But still quite light, and so the Blood Bowl board had the grid on it and everything else. And there was this, it was quite a feature of it, I think.
Yes.
But yeah, so we started playing Adeptus Titanicus as well, and then Space Marine, which was basically not just Titans, but now you can have Space Marines and Imperial Guard.
Well, they started that was kind of where I got my start, is because they did Adeptus Titanicus, and they through White Dwarf at the time, they quite often would introduce rules for new models that came out, because it fit with that whole ethos of we have a rule system and we make models for it. So anything that wasn't in the book, sort of thing, would get an article in White Dwarf, and that had happened because they'd done kind of just for funsies. They'd done some little 6 mil Space Marines and stuff like that on when they did the Adeptus Titanicus, and they started doing small tanks, and they went, big tanks, there were small ones going, and so on. And it just grew and grew, basically, and to the point where they were like, all right, let's do a whole new system for it that's incorporates both sides, the Titans and the little men and the little tanks as well, which was,
So it all kind of grew quite organically, really.
To be fair, I don't have a great insight into what the inner machinations of like how much it was planned out, but it certainly appeared that way. That it was, and certainly in the early days with like getting models made and stuff like that, stuff would get made basically, then pushed onto the designers, and it was like, all right, make rules for this. It's like, we've done this
do the poster first
win,
kind
or
of
what
thing.
have you.
Do the poster first, now make the movie kind of thing.
Like modern YouTube.
Like modern YouTube.
Title and thumbnail first, and then you make the video around that.
Yeah, I mean, bearing in mind this was Brian Ansell's company, and Brian Ansell was both, it's like it was in charge, but it's also the creative driving force in terms of. So whatever caught Brian's eye was the next thing that he did. So if he was into wizards, then he added magic to Warhammer. If he, literally just read like Terry Pratchett stuff, and 8 Winds of Magic came out. It's like that kind of stuff.
Native Americans. All right, Deathwing, here we go. Literally like that, because they complained a lot about that when I first got into the studio.
That can be quite good, though. I think to have a
company that can react that quick is
and a single kind of source of truth, a single guiding person whose vision everyone is kind of working towards to an extent, perhaps.
The counter argument to this actually was another thing that was around when I first arrived at Games Workshop was Battlefleet Gothic, in the first edition of Battlefleet Gothic. Which it didn't make it into being a big box game. That was the plan, but it didn't. And it basically, that was one of the reasons we resurrected it later, is because there were all these great designs around for it and stuff that never got used. But the first edition, one of the complaints about it was that the Imperial Cruiser that had been done for it, which is this sort of like bizarre trident-shaped object rather than the glorious steam trains that we actually made in the end, had been designed by committee overall, and that was the problem with it. What is a camel? Is a horse that's been designed by committee. So you're right. That's sort of like, to a certain extent, single eye, single vision is very, very powerful in bringing anything together. Absolutely anything.
You want a process which is creation and then kind of review / edit. You see me from a writer's point of view. I wouldn't want to write without an editor.
No.
But at the same time, you don't want that process dictating to you what you create. So, but if you don't have any breaks on the creative intent,
it can go off.
So you have that entirely like very video games marketing led creation, almost of like
which is working out so well for them now.
And then you have the cult of personality crazy guy in top. And obviously everything in between.
Every
the personalities of the people
that you see commercially is some sort of attempt to balance those two factors.
Absolutely.
And having the crazy creative.
I mean, I come from the filmmaking world. It is my background, really, and of course we have all of that as well. You have auteur-style directors who have a finger in
this
every
is the interesting
pie.
of it. In many ways, I often think that we can actually look at things like the movie industry in particular, and TV to a lesser extent, in relation to where games are going now. Because they've been doing this for 100 years, right? Games, we've been doing it for about 40, actually.
This kind of game.
This kind of game, and trying to figure out how to make what is ultimately art and entertainment and a commercial product combined, right? And that's all we're trying to do here. We're trying to entertain.
And allowing for the creativity of the purchaser to have an impact on that as well, right? Which is where it gets really messy.
Yes, indeed.
Because, of course, you release a model and you have, for example, a colour scheme that you imagine that model will have, but in the hands of a child, it could go anyway.
Absolutely.
And the good guys don't have to be the good guys, or the bad guys don't have to be the bad guys, or whatever you want to do.
Well, I think that's the massive strength of like tabletop analog kind of gaming compared to like any other media, which is like even video games with mods and stuff like that. Again, you need a certain amount of expertise to get in there and
there's still a constraint.
I want to kit bash something. I want to just make up my colour scheme. I want to make a backstory for a new character. I want to change the background. I want to even change the rules. All of these things are very accessible. You don't, there's everything's there if you want it, but actually, if it's something you don't like, you can, because it's everyone has their own version of that game in that universe. Now, obviously, when people from different kind of backgrounds collide, a pickup game or tournament, that's an issue. But in theory, it's very customizable.
It's a very permissive place to do it.
Yeah, it's built for people.
So, yeah, and we try and build our games with that in mind as well, to a greater or lesser extent. Yeah. Different companies have got a different viewpoint on this.
Yeah. There's 1,000 chapters of Space Marines, and they'll never all be detailed, so people can make up chapters of Space Marines.
Yeah.
Rather than like, well, here's 20, here's 20, and that's it.
Here's the ones that are allowed.
Yes. Part of the process has to be letting it go, right? I've heard authors talk about this in books even. Once you release your book, it belongs to the readers to an extent. Like you have your vision and what you meant, although some authors don't, but you probably know what you meant. But ultimately what the reader gets out of it is what's probably most important. And with a game, you have to leave some wiggle room for people to put
absolutely
themselves in.
And how much you should leave, because too much and it just becomes a mess. It's like, you could do anything. I hate that. I hate anybody who's thinking about trying to make something who starts from a start point of we could make anything. It's like, oh God, no. That's a terrible. It's the worst start ever.
Like, but you think outside the box. No, there's a box.
Yeah, put the box on and then see what's inside it and what's outside it. And we can talk about that later. But start with your box because there's always a box.
Yeah. The box is you have to make something and you have a limited line.
You have to do something. You've got a limited amount of time. You've got a limited amount of money. You've got a limited amount of attention.
Yeah. Well, you end up with things like. Was it Star Citizen, the video game now that's been...
endless bloat.
Yeah, trillions of dollars invested. And
it's its own thing.
Exactly.
Basically, it's its own Ponzi scheme from what I can know. Allegedly.
Who knows? Who knows? But, at the end of the day, if you don't have some kind of a constraint or a final vision in mind, then you're never going to reach a point where you're happy enough to let it go.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, I've heard it ascribed to Leonardo da Vinci, which is almost certainly an internetism bullshit thing. It's the one for no creative work is ever completed, only abandoned. But there is a truism in it, I feel like, yes. And so there comes a certain point when you work on something that you give it up. It belongs to the world now. Yeah. And that's a marvellous, beautiful time. So it genuinely is.
Question for you, this might end up being another long tangent, but I am curious. Is there any point where there most likely is, you've written something, potentially in a rush or kind of like slightly absent-mindedly, and you've then tried to do something a few years later, specifically probably at Games Workshop, and someone has said, yeah, but you said before.
Dude, I've spent 35 years writing rules. How often do you think that's happened?
Yeah, you try and come up with a new rule and suddenly
you go like, hang on, no, I screwed myself. Damn it, I can't do that at all. Yeah, all the time. Narratively, is more to the point.
Yes,
really.
I think that's one of the things. Again, we've kind of, especially for 40k, it was there was a couple of principles. One of which is like you never state absolutes.
Yes.
Because it's a large galaxy.
Don't paint yourself into a
Everything
corner.
exists somewhere.
Yeah, we were obsessive about it. And it came down from Rick, didn't it? It came down from on high to a lot of things, because that was the way he wrote. Because he operated in an environment of uncertainty about what Brian Anson would pull out the library next and read over the weekend and come in on Monday morning and declare that he now wanted, Space Marines in kilts or whatever. Yes. And he'd have to justify it then. So we couldn't have that kind of completist, everything matches up view of the 40k universe in particular, or all fantasy for that matter. So he deliberately wrote them to be very permissive backgrounds where you could slot all kinds of different things in. And it came from him and Nigel Stillman's background in archaeology as well, because they had a view of a lens of history, which is like, if you look at actual archaeology, there is so much you don't know. You're literally just pulling out little bits of like, oh, hey, look, we've got this fragmentary scroll which talks about 10 other books about this thing and kind of quotes them a couple of times, but that's all we know. So they kind of took that view of the histories that they were putting forward in
an apocrypha, really, of like
apocrypha. It's a collection of events. And stories, really, and myths and legends and so on, which change over time and change as new evidence comes to light. We were trained in that principle early on of like, all right, never to make yourself into a corner. If you can avoid it.
There's never, yes. No Space Wolf has ever fallen into chaos. Really, never?
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 Really?
Would you really say that? No. Ever? 10,000 years,
we
there
wouldn't
wasn't
be able to
one
resist
somewhere.
like putting in something like "it is said."
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Because that instantly throws
Records
it into
claim,
doubt.
you know.
Yeah, exactly.
There's always the unreliable narrator. If you want to say something
always.
fairly definitive, you know, it's like the Codex Astartes says there are 1,000 Space Marines per chapter. Good for the Codex Astartes. We know that reality is not true. The other thing, like, is, in terms of narrative and world building and stuff, is going back to that interactivity. Is that you get a lot. People like mystery. They like the gap. So we always like looked at it as shining spotlights on little bits of the galaxy, either through time or space. But there's the vast unknown in between, which is kind of part of the unknown that's within the history, within the universe itself. They don't know what's going on just in the next star system. Never mind, on the other side of the galaxy. But also just that room to explore, but also that room to debate and interact with stuff. So. Again,
space to be creative.
Yeah, like rules, you don't want too much debate. Background, like whole internet forums filled with it, would just be wiped out if it was like, no, this is definitive and there is nothing else to explore. And and again, real history, the real world doesn't exist like that. There is no definitive. We don't know even something as recent as the Second World War, a little less recent now, I suppose, than when we started. But again, endless biographies and volumes and stuff's come to light.
The most written records in history for any war ever. But there's still things that you don't.
It's still ultimately written by
nailed down.
human people with opinions and their own goals.
And their own concerns about what they were actually recording. So it's like, we'll just leave that bit out.
And history, as they say, is written by the victors, right?
So all of that as well, definitely. And one of those things, lots of times you're trying to create ambiguity. Oh, well, he said, she said. And you're like, that's the whole point. Who's right? Yeah. Which one do you think? There's evidence on this side, there's evidence on that side. You get to interpret.
Magnus did nothing wrong debate.
Yeah, Magnus did nothing wrong.
There's a whole swath of people who love the lore on things like this. The more complicated, the better. My perspective has always been that they know things. They certainly come across like they know things, right? And I suppose that creates debate, but that's what you're saying. That's kind of part of the idea, right? If people are able to have two different perspectives and for them both to be equally valid,
but not just I think or I feel, but go like, actually, it says it's going back to what you said. Actually, no. If you look back in the 37th millennium, this happened.
People debate Warhammer 40,000 lore more than they debate the Bible, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we posted...
Legit, man.
I think you underestimate how much people debate the Bible.
We had people arguing in TikTok comments.
We did, I made...
Did I say
the relative
offhandedly?
Mistake.
I basically offhandedly said Space Marines didn't have dicks.
You did, We were talking about them being...
You specifically said,
specifically you said that they have their wangers chopped. That was the exact words that he used. Had their wangers chopped. And
stimulated conversation.
People did not like that. But then some people were fine with it. But it was like, then it became the difference between like chemical castration and all of this. And there was a whole debate about what qualifies as...
People on their commute on TikTok just like, I'm going to miss this fucking stop. I need to tell this guy.
Someone's wrong on the internet.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Had to get engagement.
Yes. But that was the most engagement we've ever had, was just being wrong about something.
Exactly. And to be fair, again, there is no, there is no
internet moment.
There is no canon answer to that either. So some of that stemmed from an old picture of a spaceman without his armour on stuff with the black carapace, but it's like, just because he doesn't have anything down there, it could be, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, exactly. And there are contending people or worlds within GW about whether that's true or not, and it doesn't matter because again, it's like it's nothing we're going to have to worry about showing.
I'm pretty sure I refer to spacemen as eunuchs.
Yeah, exactly. And
eunuch soldiers.
Yes. Yeah, well, and also then,
But the thing is that because of the way that it's developed, all of these things can be true.
Yeah.
All of them can be true.
Yes.
Well, there you go. You heard it here first. I wasn't wrong.
And I wasn't wrong either.
It's all true.
Yeah, absolutely.
It all can be true.
None of it's true.
For certain people, and it's understandable for them, that's really annoying.
Yes.
And you have to bear in mind those people aren't necessarily wrong for their desires there, for there to be a truth that they can understand.
For those people, I have to offer them, have you considered World War II history?
But this is the thing, isn't it? But I suppose, and I'm very glad that this is the perspective that I'm hearing, is that it doesn't matter because it's not the point, right? It shouldn't be the point. It should be about having fun,
Creativity.
and creativity.
Yeah,
and
one of the things, I mean,
that
we
space.
dinged on a bit earlier on about the 80s. Gav's old enough to remember the 80s, and I grew up in them. And wargaming at that time was a very serious business, all right? Because it was kind of an outgrowth of scale modelling, which was all about accurate representation. So the idea that war games could exist was only kind of permissible if they were felt to be accurate representations of
Imaginary things.
well, no, real historical
the things
events.
we can't necessarily
Oh,
prove.
sorry, wargaming. Sorry,
The Battle of
wargaming as
Cannae.
in
Yeah,
okay,
historical
sorry.
wargaming.
Right,
Historical
exactly.
wargaming,
This
not
whole sci-fi and fantasy
yeah.
bizarreness was very ill thought of initially, particularly in the UK when it first arrived. It was a dirty business.
You just make up any,
You could just make up
as opposed to
things.
this second century Byzantium army list, which is
Or,
just made up
serious
as well.
Napoleonics,
Yeah.
and so forth, all the uniform details and so forth. Oh, yes. Yeah, it was very much a dirty secret when it came across, and there things like D&D arriving was like, top shelf stuff.
Well, going back to what I was saying earlier. So when I was 16 or so, 15 maybe, and looking for players, and like I say, my friend and I played a lot of Space Marine Adeptus Titanicus, and I saw a card in the local library with a phone number which was like Stevenage War Games Club or something like that. So I rang them up. I said, "Oh yeah, cool. Yeah, actually, I'd like to come along and play." So, what do you play? Oh, my friend and I, we sort of like play Space Marine and stuff. Oh, no, we only do historicals here. And it just hung up on me. It wasn't even like, because to be fair, I would have been, I'd actually previously to that, me and my other friends and stuff had made airfix tanks and done brum brum noises and done actually Donald Featherston war games books and old stuff. I've done a lot of that historical stuff. But the thing was, there was a whole made ready to go war game over here, which happened to be about huge giant robots,
Big stompy robots,
and tiny space marines. So it was like, okay, well, if you're going to be like that, I'm just going to look at this. But as much as I'd love to have
surprise. It's Games Workshop did nothing but grow because that was the environment for tabletop wargaming. But but it could be cool,
Yeah.
So I would like to talk about giant stompy smashy robots, which we will get on into a minute. But while I'm here, I would like to just fanboy a little bit and talk about Gorka Morka. Because I know we've got Zeogenesis business to talk about, but also
Okay.
I'm in the room with the Gorka Morka people.
Why is it always Gorka Walker?
Sorry.
It's because it's the child that was
It's a great name.
was never appreciated.
Red Headed Stepchild, yes.
It was my favourite game growing up.
Yep.
And I think because I got one set for Christmas when they used to be like £40, which is incredible. But then it had a deal with the Works, which meant that it was £15 in the Works.
Got remaindered basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I got a shit lot of trucks.
Yes.
And I played
I bet you did.
the shit
Full
out.
Mad Max.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
full on,
geez.
yeah.
Nice.
But the thing that grabbed me about Gorka Morka when I was a kid, also it had a separate lore book, which was
The other book.
The other book, yeah.
Not
It felt
Dope.
fresh
One
at
of
the
my
time.
one of my best moments that was.
Yeah.
What should we call the other book? The other book.
And as with Games Workshop lore, me and my friend at school, he thought it was pronounced the viewer book, and I had to explain to him, no, it's the other book. We debated it because it was Games Workshop.
Right.
Gorka Morka, I think I've briefed you on it, is basically Mad Max with orcs.
Yes, I think I've
But then
seen
there's a
your
box
one.
lid over there.
There is a box lid
There's
over there.
lurking
I
there,
am
looking
gonna
at
ask you
us
to sign
like
that.
now.
Yeah, the thing that gripped me as a kid was kind of the expanse of the lore for what was essentially a standalone game with some expansions.
Yep.
Is that you've got what is essentially the first appearance of the Necrons on a page, which are the space robot Egyptians.
Not true.
Not true, but
No,
for me
they
as
were
a
in
kid,
White
that's...
Dwarf before that.
Were they in White Dwarf before that? Okay.
Yeah.
But they're teased.
Did it right, Dave?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
There's a big tease.
There was we roped a lot of the lore into like nods towards the Necrons.
It reminds me of the specific 2000 AD cover. I can't remember with the metal skull in the sand. But it's just some orcs driving away in the distance, and in the foreground of this picture is a Necron skull.
That's right. Yeah,
and then the next few
the
pages.
Des Hanley piece, if I remember rightly.
Yes, that's the one. And they mention a few times, there's something under the sand. We're not entirely sure what it is. And it's just little.
Yeah, there's some
moments like
pyramids
that.
around and
There's
stuff
some
like
stuff
that.
going on. We don't know what it is. We're too busy collecting scrap and killing each other.
Yep.
Yeah, was that kind of like a specific business move to introduce those in there, or were you guys actually just having fun with that?
We were just having fun.
I think so. Yeah. So can't bear that.
Yeah, because the Necrons, like I said, they'd been in White Dwarf, and there was the kind of idea to do something with them, and they were kind of cool. And Chaos Androids have been around forever, just the whole Terminator skeleton robot was cool. So we knew we wanted to do something with them at some point.
Yeah.
And we were trying to keep it alive, basically. And that was the way I viewed it.
Yeah, I think so. But it was just fun. We liked, again, it's about burying secrets for people to find. So
we were
a lot
doing
of that
for our own entertainment as much as anything else. And this is it. We knew we got, like skeletal Egyptian-looking robots to do at some point, and we had a deserty planet and
and
pyramids and something buried in this. Good fun.
Yeah, there was a chunk of that which was because that's where we started doing like things like the inquisitorial reports and things. So again, that in-universe style of kind of like of background, which obviously dominated third edition. And there was a couple of bits in there that Ian Pigstock did, and he was very much because he sort of modelled it on real kind of like Egyptology, kind of like the Great Pyramids and the conspiracy theory, ancient alien stuff around that. So he said, oh well, if we look at it from these angles, and then this is the proof of it, and that was great because he was into that, not into that sort of thing, but he understood that sort of level of it. So we were like, cool. We'll present that as an Adeptus Mechanicus report and stuff like that. And then once we got onto Digger Knob, and you got the diggers, and actually they start interacting with these, whatever they are. The Wreckers, is it the Wreckers? I can't remember.
Muties?
No, but they get saved by the people below the pyramids, the diggers originally. It was about creating this little world and this miniature universe, which was kind of indicative of the wider universe. So, there was a backstory which wasn't necessarily massively revealed, but, there's you kind of piece it together. There was an Adeptus Mechanicus ship we were surveying this world when the big Orc Hulk comes crashing in. Yeah. And basically that other ship, the Adeptus Mechanicus ship, gets ripped down and crashes into orbit as well. And then, this is thousands of years later. The Orcs have turned into the civilization that's building this thing called Gorka Morka, which is, a rocket or a teleport or a city or a god or something. It's going to take
it's a big machine with
going to sort everything out.
Okay. Collecting up basically all the scrap of the space hulk.
But to bring this back somewhat circular to things you did talk about earlier, the great thing actually about Gorka Morka is it's very open and very permissive.
I was going to say
to do your thing with, to do your gang with.
It sounds like taking these things and crashing them on this planet and isolating them from the rest of the galaxy.
Smashing it all up. It's post-apocalyptic.
Exactly.
So do what you want.
You have elements of the lore from other things, but you've also got things that are specific to this and cultural things that have sprung up from there that allows for some freedom. But also for you, it sounds massively allowed for some freedom.
Well, because it's only a single planet.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, we always used to say about 1 in 40,000, it's just be a million worlds and 10,000 years of history. You can do anything you want, anything you want within that, amount of space and time frame.
And lots of the characters in 40k and stuff, again, gained real world gravitas, and then that was then reflected in the background. So, painted with Gazgul, but Captain Tycho, various others, they appeared as sort of models in a battle report, and then they got a name, and then
they got famous.
Was it interesting to you to see, obviously you didn't have the same immediate feedback that we have today, but to see, no, exactly, because that allowed you to have some autonomy, but was it interesting for you to see certain things that really hit with people that you kind of weren't necessarily expecting, little side characters or anything like that, where you thought it was just a silly thing and then suddenly a community's gripped onto it?
They weren't so incredibly frequent that you could judge about some, but generally the people always seem to take to things a lot better. It's one of the reasons we started doing special characters in the first place. It was a Warhammer thing originally and done very consciously. But the unexpected thing, Tycho's been the classic one of dude was just in a battle report once sort of thing, and
but it had cool armor, basically.
But had cool armor, and had a bit of backstory, courtesy of the battle report, and now he's like a real linchpin kind of a character. So they would surprise you on occasion. Yeah,
I mean, people sort of just the other day had somebody saying, "Oh, I became a writer after reading. I did for third edition in White Dwarf, I did a story called The Torturer's Tale, which was about Astrobel Vecht and his kind of history, or is it? Because again, very unreliable narrator.
Yes.
And it was one of the few because there was so little background about the Dark Elder at the time. Lots of people latched onto that. And again, for me, it was like a 4-page story in White Dwarf or something. But there's a lot of people who go, "Oh, I loved that story. That was great. That got me into the Dark Elder or whatever." And whether that's because it was just absent from somewhere else, because the codexes were tiny and stuff, or not, or just because it was that character and conveyed what they wanted. So it's those kind of things. I mean, all of it. I just find it's incredible. People keep. I've just the other day I've did an interview for a group in Spain who were still really into Warhammer Quest,
Right.
and asking me about the Pit Fighter and stuff that I vaguely remember working on, and then trying to rack your brains of like, what what was it like back then? Oh, I'm trying to remember what we did actually.
Yeah.
So the fact that most of this stuff, especially stuff that had no support for 15, 20 years, but the internet
It's come
came
back
just the
round
sort of right
again,
time, I
yes.
suppose, to support. So communities, online communities, arrived at just about the right time for some of these games. For them, Epic in particular was, and Net Epic and stuff survived for a long time. Blood Bowl.
Well,
was
you can
always-
argue Blood Bowl's always been kept
the longest.
alive through it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The one my patron community have mentioned more often than not is, I told them I was coming here today. I mentioned it last night, and they were like, "Fucking hell!" They specifically I said, "Have you got any questions you want me to throw their way?" And 3, maybe 4 of the responses were, "I don't have a question. Can you just thank Gav Thorpe for Inquisitor for me?
Yeah.
We still play it."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, that's another one. I'm really proud of Inquisitor and what we did and things, but also the legacy it's had, both like for let's say for that style of gaming. I mean, like the 40k modern 40k background, lots of it derived from what we did in Inquisitor. I think and not just Inquisitor. It's like Inquisitor moved further. We did a certain thing with 3rd edition 40k, but then Inquisitor pushed it. I think, and go back to lots of the stuff that we just kind of made up
There
for
was stuff to
Inquisitor.
get into Inquisitor that we just couldn't really touch out in 40k. I mean, the whole thing about the radicals and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely, and it still resonates.
Versus
And
radicals
yeah.
split within the Inquisition itself is just something you could explore properly in that space that we just couldn't.
I mean, similarly, I'd say, I've just been at Adepticon, and one of the big things there, our Zeogenesis store was just a couple of stores down from the Trench Crusade guys, and Thomas Pirinen, obviously, again, much more on the Warhammer side, well known. And a number of people, Thomas sent my way as well with the Mordheim rulebook.
Yes.
Saying, like, oh, do you know Gav's down there as well? Because I did the little stories in it and things like that. And again, just the love for a game that wasn't really around that long. I mean, it was supported, it benefited from the Fanatic stuff for a little bit, the Town Crier and stuff like that.
Yes.
It makes sense though, doesn't it? Because like back in the day, back when you didn't necessarily have access to everything, you couldn't see everything that was available. You'd buy the thing in the shop that appealed to you, and if you didn't have buckets of cash, you'd probably just play that thing.
Yeah.
So same thing goes for a lot of stuff like video games and all sorts. Back when I was a kid, you'd have this thing and you loved this thing, but nowadays no one even knows what it is. But some of these things have a real kind of enduring legacy with people.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, in about 10 years, you'll get really nostalgic about that thing. And you'll go online and you'll look for little groups that play that thing. And you'll resurrect it and find emulators so that you can play it again.
Exactly.
Already there.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely happening.
And yet we will never get young again.
Yes, but you will never be young again.
No,
We tried.
But if you close your eyes and dream real hard, you can feel it.
I mean, just smell the pages of red.
Part of, I mean, seriously, part of, I think, loving the things that you used to love when you're young is part of feeling young again.
Yeah.
Actually, that is part of the appeal. And,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just to get that feeling.
Any feeling.
Any feeling in my legs. That would be lovely.
So you guys have worked together in the past quite a lot, as we've just discussed. You've got a new thing, though, a new shiny thing called Zeogenesis. You got it confused several times on the way down with Neon Genesis, Evangelion, and said slightly variations on different names, and I've not corrected you. 'cause I
yeah,
thought
all
that's what I
part
did.
of our cunning.
Almost
Yes.
That's it. It's all about the SEO, right? That's
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the word of mouth SEO.
Yes.
Yeah, Right, that sounds like something I've heard of.
Yes, exactly.
And it was funny enough. Talk about coming up with things. Coming up with names is like one of the biggest pains in your ass.
Oh yeah.
It's a notorious bugbear.
And coming up with a name for an entire game system. That's
More so.
So yeah, this was very much. It came out of trying to call, what do we call it, our large armored suits.
Yes.
And we went through various things and stuff like that, and we and it was more about just the sounds as much as anything.
Yeah.
And particularly being inspired by like anime and manga and things like that. Again, there's a use of language sometimes which isn't necessarily about direct translation, but just just sounds good.
Just sounds cool.
And so like Zeo just sounded like, so these are Zeo forms.
Like Zaku. Zaku
Yeah.
just sounds cool. What the fuck's a Zaku? Don't know.
Yeah.
Sorry, slight derailment. I was playing the Mobile Suit Gundam FMV game from 1996
Right.
on my Windows 98 machine is the twattiest thing I can say today. It had all the tropes, the blue screen with the terrible TV actors just kind of like gurning down the screen. But what it most interestingly had was they referred to Zakus as Zaks before the language had changed. So obviously in Japan, when they say the word Zak, they say Zaku. And now the language has changed that it's actually just spelt that way. But it's just a lot of American people looking at me down the camera saying, yeah, that Zak was real fast. And I'm like...
That feels wrong.
Feels dirty. It's the eye contact.
So what?
Yeah. So Zeogenesis, new game by Best Hobby. You guys are doing World and Rules, if I'm correct. And it's already a pre-established universe. There's a spaceship racing game.
Well,
right?
yes.
Technically, yes.
Technically, I would
is the
hesitate to
best
say
kind.
pre-established. Basically, we had enough time, because we've been working on it for years at this point. And I had enough time, because I'm primarily focused on the rules, that while we were working on models in the background, I spat out a whole extra little spaceship racing game set in the universe. And convinced Danny, hey, it's a really good way to promote your universe, and get some stakes in the ground. And because back in the day when I started out, like we touched on earlier, I mostly worked in Epic and Space Marine initially. Yeah. So by the time I transitioned onto working on Warhammer 40,000, I'd actually already got a kind of like meta view of the universe and how different races fought in it and stuff like that. I always found that really useful. And again, when we did Battlefleet Gothic and looked at the spaceships, I found that really useful in kind of your holistic view of the universe. So I thought, wow, I've kind of wanted to do another little spaceship game because I like doing spaceship games, and what if we fit it in within the Zeogenesis universe, and it'll say something about space travel, always very important in sci-fi, was the reasoning behind it. So yeah, we did it in Blaster magazine.
Right, yeah.
Just as a, print it and play it yourself kind of a jobby.
Oh, so that's like a rule set that didn't come with models necessarily.
Yeah, you'd have to. I think they have done some models for it because
STLs,
everybody can they can do STLs for anything these days. But yeah, it was a design. I kind of like cobbled together like 4 disparate ships out of the various collections I have for the particular ships for it, because obviously you do different stats, because of course you do. Yeah. What I'm building here, and some basic build your own rules and stuff like that. Because it was just an excuse to try and explore that space a little, the space as it were, in terms of Zeogenesis, because that's what we're in the business of doing. We're establishing a whole universe, and it's very easy to sort of go like, all right, well, we're doing skirmish games, so everything's about skirmish games. It's a superhero problem. Yes, the entire universe revolves around this particular thing all of a sudden, and universes aren't really like that. Superheroes can get away with it because they set them in real world. So there's texture there already. If you're doing a whole sci-fi universe, you need to know a bit more about it, and that's Gav's department. That's why I dragged him in to come and help out Best Hobby.
So with the Zeogenesis universe, what we've got is we've got a narrative which has been delivered via a weekly webcomic, which is on the website, which is started in the new year. So we're sort of like 12 pages in, 12 drops in, something like that. And that's kind of like our entry point into the universe. So it's a big universe. There's 100 star systems. There's lots of variety in there and stuff. But we go, well, we're going to start here and we're going to follow these people, and then expand out from there, rather than like massive lore drop of like, here's everything that you need to know. One, because we don't know all of that stuff, and 2, because it's just easier to navigate. And then so actually we tied in the slip runners with that of like, there's this big bit of news. Basically, there's the basis of that they've lost the star system. It's the short version of that without getting into too much detail, which is a terrible, terrible thing. But news of this, catastrophe, and or the fact that there was a message out of the star system just before it disappeared, is very valuable. So actually, the slip runners, who are like these, like elite kind of like couriers, who can do the fastest slips from system to system. It allowed us to talk a little bit about how the star systems are arranged and stuff like that, and how navigation works, and on that macro scale. So it's like the first one out with that news is like the most valuable. Second place doesn't count, kind of thing. So it gave us an excuse for this very kind of like high stakes, tense racing game. So of like, well, okay. And so it all just comes together nicely. It stands alone as a cool game, and everyone knows why they're playing, but also actually as kind of like, just to say, as a prologue to the wider Zeogenesis narrative, it's like, oh, cool, that's the thing that happened, basically on page 2 of the comic is that event. I see how that ties in now. So yeah, it's just a really...
Yeah, the fact is, from like years of working together at Workshop and subsequent to that, we're older hands at this kind of thing, like building a universe in little stages over a long period of time. Because with a monthly magazine, as it used to be with White Dwarf and so on, we always had those opportunities to, just put in a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And now we've kind of come full circle to the point with technology and things like doing a webcomic and doing releases on GameFound and stuff like that fulfill a similar role of like a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting to be able to drop these little bits of lore and these little mechanics and these kind of, like you say, these macro level points that need to be made without releasing some kind of a glossary that just says these are the star systems, they are this far apart, this is how they travel between them.
Well, we've embraced that again, so across, sort of getting ahead of ourselves I suppose, but across both the rules and the background, it's like, this is the digital age, so there is physical product, these will be plastic miniatures and all the rest of it, but actually we don't have to be beholden to big, kind of like, here's an 80-page book, every few months to support those. There will be a web app. Most of the setting material will be on a website called World Anvil, which you'll be able to access through the web app. You can go and look at it now.
Nice. Yeah.
And basically between now and, particularly the end of the campaign, but onwards, we just add articles. It's essentially a build your own wiki. So a lot of people use it for their role-playing campaigns or the setting for their novel and stuff like that. So we're using it basically to build out the Zeogenesis setting, the 100 Suns, and it's a mix of stuff. There's stuff that's like about the Zeos, about the weapons from a thing we call Chambert's Guide. I can't think who writes that.
Dandy Chambert, who could that be? Man of mystery.
And so that's a bit more like a Jane's Guide, but slightly more, a bit more informal. But that kind of like, well, this is how the weapons work, this is how Zeo suits work, kind of thing. And then we have a travel log, which is like originally we were sort of doing it in audio, but at the moment it's kind of like transcripts of a travelling idiot, basically.
Called Trev, is that
called
right?
Trev, yeah.
Called
So it's the Trevor log.
Oh.
Which was just like, Trevelyan something, Ridgway the Third. Trev. And who's like decided to take a year out, as it were, from his executive.
Yeah, he's taking a gap year, hasn't he? Let's go travel the outer rim, sort of thing.
And talk to the real people.
Talk to the real people.
So we've got very relevant, like, here's the weapons, this is what, this is how meson beamers work, kind of thing. And then we've also got Trev out just visiting places and weird stuff and people and showing that wider galactic stuff. And then we just have articles basically on, so the conceit is we have a kind of a bit of an equivalent to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy type thing, which is called the Captain Starslip's Guide to the Universe. So Captain Starslips is really old, well-established kind of icon in the 100 Suns, been around for nearly 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And it's sort of very believed. And so it's this interactive guide. So the wiki that we're creating is, without pushing the conceit too far, is that guide. So you can click on stuff and get lost in things. And it talks about the massacre at such and such, and you go, oh, that's interesting. So if people want to really delve into the background, it's there. And if people want to skip to the army list,
yes,
they can do that just as easily, and there'll be a little,
But the point being about it is to leave all those little open doors and stubs and stuff that we can play with later, or other people can as well, for that matter. That we do sort of fairly habitually as we write.
Yeah, digital space is almost infinite. So we don't, but also, you can go back and expand particular articles. So again, if we wanted to expand, we go back to a world, because one of the problems of, very aware of, like many years working on 40k and then certainly writing novels in it, like 40 years later, was like, there was this reference somewhere. Where was that? Which White Dwarf was that?
You can't control F 1,000 books. And
Yeah,
find
absolutely.
it.
And it doesn't necessarily matter a lot, but sometimes, whereas, again, an opportunity to build something from scratch, let's build that reference into it.
Yes.
And the other thing actually with something like World Anvil for creators, again, is there's a backdoor version. You can have private pages on there and stuff. So as we introduce people who might be writing in it or drawing in it and stuff, you can have some of that information, that real world information about the inspirations and all the rest of it behind there, just still as a repository. So So it's just a useful resource rather than like trying to create world Bibles 30 years later and like all the rest of it, which has been an ongoing.
Where it said
thing.
that in an article somewhere. If only I could find it,
Yeah.
etc. Which is always the story of trying to create a world Bible after the event.
Yeah, even now it's like, right, we really need to get our references sorted on the side of this, because even just making up stuff for the opening 2 factions is like there's just a lot already happening. So yeah, but it's that constant drip, of like, okay, that's cool. There's going to be, like I say, we'll look at putting about 30 articles a month.
Okay.
For the next 2 or 3 months, and then we'll see what the rate is. But
yeah, fair. So talk to me like I'm 5 is what you said earlier.
Yeah, 5.
So for everyone who doesn't know what Zeogenesis is, who are the 2 factions and why are they scrapping?
There are 2 primary sort of armed factions that fight in Zeogenesis. So the Guard Corps on one side and what we call the Forces of the Pact on the other side.
Is that these 2?
These are all.
So
this is all Guard Corps.
The painted guys are Guard Corps, and that's an example of a pact.
Yes, sure. We wanted to make sure we showed off some pact. And how to explain what they are, Gav? You're better at this than I am.
So Guard Corps is slightly more organised, militaristic. They're not they're still sort of independent operators, because there's no central government. It's one of the features of the 100 Suns, but there is what we call hegemony, which is embodied by at the moment by an organisation called Unitas. So essentially Guard Corps is the military part of Unitas and its subsidiaries. And it's not necessarily all corporate and stuff, but there's a lot of that. On the other side, we have the People's Galactic, which is more free roaming, like, hey, you're not the boss of us kind of guys. So that's where Pact is. So again, it's literally a pact they made like a few hundred years ago to fight the forces of something back then called the New Earth Tyranny. But they're still proper military forces, but some of them like double up as, some of them will be Royal Guard, or they'll be smugglers, or they'll be just like some stevedores or whatever.
Hunters, whatever. Dangerous animal hunters, or this kind of stuff.
Yeah. But they tend to be much more individualistic and a little bit more ad hoc in their technology. They tend to live in space more, whereas the Guard Corps sort of like
You've gone for an army and rebels dynamic. Almost.
We have, but the politics aren't big empire versus rebels.
Yeah, I was going to say, it doesn't sound to me like either one of those is necessarily the good guys and the bad guys off the bat.
Closer in many ways to the Expanse and the situation you've got going on there.
No, I've been thinking about mentioning it. I love the Expanse.
No, absolutely. Everyone's got an agenda. One person's freedom fighters, another person's terrorist, all that kind of those levels. Just because you're one or other. So the 2 basic philosophies are known as hegemony or accord, which they adhere to. So, but one of those could be like, accord could be we're all kind of like freedom-loving hippies, but it could also be like, no, I'm a complete tyrant and I don't want them telling me what to do, and I rule this star system as a god, potentially. And similarly, hegemony doesn't have to be authoritarian. It can still be democratic stuff, but they basically have a template society called prefectures, which could be as small as an arcology, one
and
city.
Rules that apply to everyone, whether you agree to them or not. Can you imagine?
I know.
Exactly,
Born into a whole set of rules.
Yeah, we have one currency, we have one set of laws, we have, we try it as best possible, use one clock, all that kind of stuff. And it kind of, so it stems from that, and very much some of these larger organisations, and obviously, again, these ideas don't do stuff like hegemony. It's just an idea in the same way that, so people who believe in that ideal are the ones that are moving stuff, organisations that believe that's best. So they deploy troops to, do certain things, whether it'll be like guarding their assets or breaking a strike or raiding somewhere or trying, corporate espionage, all these kind of things. So this is not a galaxy at war. Everyone's trying to kill everybody 24/7.
Yeah,
it's very much very directed, small scale, almost black ops type stuff.
In a way, not having a central government avoids that kind of a thing, right? Because it's the big central power that just sends large swaths of people to die and declares war that causes that.
Yeah,
if it's
more fractured than that, and also there's a degree of transition that can occur. A particular planetary system, moon, colony, or what have you, might pass from being, under a hegemony style leadership to a more accord style one, or vice versa over time, depending on external influences and who's got the money and who's living next door and what individuals feel about it. So it's not as set in stone as the sort of like, yes, we must destroy everyone.
Yeah, and
Kind of like the Belters in The Expanse in a way, in that there's not a specific. They try and have a leadership in there, don't they? But there's
there's contention even within that about like, well, why should we follow you?
Yeah.
and so forth. Yes, I say that there was more inspiration, and that's slightly more kind of like looser sort of clan affiliator sort of an approach to life.
yeah, absolutely. And for the vast majority of people are just trying to get on with their lives within those systems, within the and sometimes just get caught up in these conflicts, So, but like I say, but then within that overall context is this specific narrative so we focused on one of the most recently discovered heliospheres, the star system's called, because the bit we haven't mentioned is, so there's 100 star systems, each of them is surrounded by this weird barrier that basically you cannot pass through. It's called the limit. Yeah, it is a limit of. So ships explode if they cross.
The whole 100 systems.
Yes.
Each system.
So each system. So each system is like, think of it as a little sphere, a heliosphere, and if you're inside there, you can't get out. Except there are these things called slipways where they sort of like, some of them connect to each other. So there is a way of actually moving from system to system called slipping, which is where you got slip runners came from. So stuff can move around, and that's kind of like, that's the closer we get to FTL travel, is being able to move from star system to star system. But they tend to be fairly isolated politically and stuff. It's because we don't actually have everything within that is still relativistic travel. So getting across the star system still takes quite a while.
And the slip points themselves move around, and sometimes they may attenuate at times or realign with a different system and so on. So it's not an always open gate.
No, it's mostly science, but a little bit of art, and kind of trying to hit the middle of it,
threading the needle, sort of thing.
So, and the big question being, is that to keep out something or to keep humanity in? And so,
because that's obvious.
Prison or castle is like the.
Well, I say obviously that as a mechanic must have been created in one way or another, right?
Yes, exactly.
Keep the system.
It may be natural, and furthermore, the people in different heliospheres, they can look at the stars and they can work out they aren't physically adjacent to each other at all. So stars don't align as they should
in terms of how the slipways connect.
Yeah, so we focused on this particular one called Astropelago, and the slipway, the system there's vanishes one called Periphery. So these two, in a London Underground map sort of way, it comes two stations next to each other, but actually it's the equivalent of one. It could be that one's in Manchester and one's in London, but in a galactic term. So distance in terms of travelling through the 100 suns isn't the same. It does not equate to where they are physically within the galaxy.
About time rather than distance, though, aren't they all the same thing?
That's right.
Well, that's
easy now.
Exactly. So you go one system over, is one slip jump. That's fine, but actually those two systems are 30,000 light years apart. Whereas this system on this side of the the 100 suns, and this one are only 10 light years apart in terms of where they are.
Yeah, but you can't cross 10 light years, but you can slip.
But you can slip all the way from one to the other. And also, Earth's been lost as well. Yeah. So this is like about 10,000 years in the future, and they've had civilizations rise and fall and all the rest of it. So Earth is now a memory. But and one of the things actually, the hegemony people right at the start were like, well, we're here now. We'll just start building. This is humanity's redoubt. Whereas the Accord was very much get out there. They started discovering the slipways, and but there's still some of them like, no, we want to break out. We still want to find old Earth. If you're not the boss of us, you can't keep us in 100 suns.
So it is a distant future of now.
Yeah, very much so. Again, this is like space fantasy, really. We know we've got our internal logics and stuff, but again, it's anime. But it's very a lot of it's quite street level, quite Appleseed, Ghost in the Shell like size. But there are some very Gundam-esque big meta elements to it as well.
I am noticing the vague blurred lines of there's no good guys, bad guys. Like when you watch one Mobile Suit movie and it's from the side of the Federation, and you think, oh, the guys dressed
all
like
about
World War I
perspective.
Germans are bad guys. Yeah. But then you watch the new Netflix show, which has got the Hideo Kojima title Requiem for Vengeance, which that title needs to fuck off, but whatever. But it completely flip reverses. And what are generally considered universe bad guys, in the most basic sense, you see the war from their perspective and how fucking terrifying it is when this 14-year-old is in a giant robot suit killing everyone. And it makes the universe just feel so much bigger and more complicated and more interesting.
Yeah.
And I just quite like the cynicism of people not really fighting over ideology as much as it's people fighting, if that makes sense.
Because
people are always going to fight.
Yeah,
like you say, they're just trying to live their life, and
Yeah, and one of the keys, so Danny Block, who kind of created Best Hobby, and this is his vision really. One of the key kind of briefs was this concept of technology as a multiplier. So humanity is still humanity. That's the thing. It's like there's still humans. It might be 10,000 years in the future, but people are still people. The only thing is like their dreams, their fears, their greed, their whatever else. All of these things that make us human carry with us. We can't escape that. But the thing is, the technology have access to multiplies all of that. The ability to go from star system to star system, rather than wanting to rule one planet is I want to rule 20 planets, or rather than like I just want nobody to touch me. Basically means I'm going to travel 5 star systems and try and be as far away from everybody as possible. You know, so the technology doesn't define humanity; it just exacerbates our best and worst traits.
I do love a no aliens science fiction. I think it's because I think it like I say, it asks those kinds of questions, which in a lot of ways I think are more interesting.
Yes.
Have more interesting answers, or at least possibilities, than some alien stuff. Because as soon as you start introducing these completely out of pocket, out there scenarios, you can just kind of do anything. But if you work within this framework of humanity, and all of the people, regardless of their faults or virtues, are ultimately human beings, it kind of grounds it in this way that makes it.
Yeah, there's not like an obvious. Definitely, there's not an obvious external threat, which is like I say, there's no us versus them within the setting, and there's no from like the two factions that we launch with. Again, it's a human issue. It's 1,000 years. They've explored the extent of and it's what happens when they think they've reached the extent of how far they can go. And then there's this one trigger event as well. Basically, and essentially turns it into this sort of like. Powder keg system. Like as the news is going to ripple out, it's going to get because a world disappearing, a slip point closing, disappearing is unheard of until this point. They move, like I say, they're unpredictable. That's
so some people want to suppress the information. Suddenly, altogether.
It's like
some
terrifying.
People want to tell everybody. Some people want to research it. Some people want to stay the hell away. Etc. etc.
So once the news gets back to the again, there's been phases of exploration. So we're very much sort of like in the outskirts at the moment, but there's much more.
There's core systems.
Yeah, the core systems are much more developed, and much more resources have already as they come to bear. On these problems, things will escalate, which doesn't necessarily mean massive battles, but just means
it does mean bigger Zeoforms.
But it does mean bigger
smashy robots, right?
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah, I was gonna ask in terms of when you are thinking about a universe like this, obviously because you're starting essentially from scratch. You say the guy's name, sorry, I forget.
Danny,
it was his kind of top arching concept, but then. How do you think about where to start? What's the logical train of thought to go from, right, we've got this concept and this overarching universe, but what's the most interesting or best place to begin that? How did you kind of come to that decision?
Well, what's your box? You remember we talked about the box?
Yeah, absolutely.
First of all, you've got to figure out what box you're working inside.
Yeah.
Are we making a 6mm giant epic battles game? Are we making a spaceship game? Are we making a tabletop skirmish game? And when you define that box, a lot of that for a tabletop miniatures game comes from, well, what miniatures are you going to make? Yeah, obviously. Because believe me, no one in the universe sets out with the idea they're going to make a tabletop miniature game without having some idea of what kind of miniatures they want to make.
Yeah, of course.
It's actually the primary driver.
Yeah.
In Danny's case, he was absolutely in love with anime, manga, and so forth, and that was his primary influence, and that was what he wanted to make miniatures of. He wanted to make plastic injection molded Zeoform kits. Basically, that was his
large kits, jumbo shrimp.
Jumbo shrimp, indeed. Not little guys. Not
Why have shrimp when you can have jumbo shrimp?
Normal heroes are big guys, which is why when you look at Zeoforms. These aren't the biggest ones. No. That's the tactical, that's our smallest. That's the battle, that's our medium. It goes up from there. So that gives you your start point, really. Of like, all right. It also tells you a little bit about how the game is as well. Specifically, anime manga style. That doesn't mean clumpy robots, thick armor. It means dynamism, movement.
Agile, basically large humans.
That can
fly.
Jump off a bit. Could potentially fly, leap around, jump from building to building in a single bound, this kind of thing. Skid around corners with sparks coming off their feet. That's the kind of imagery you're trying to evoke in
That's
the
how
game.
it felt when I played it.
And that's how the game should play. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not, let me just check my my data sheet and cross off another box. It's going to be different sort of dynamic combat. So that was the key thing for the combat. And then you start building a universe around that to justify those
the context
happening.
So it always goes back to, like, I've likened it to a few things in Warhammer videos and got backlash for it.
Yeah.
But it's the classic He-Man thing of, that's your toy line. Make me a fucking cartoon. To sell.
Absolutely, because that's where we
product.
started out from, and that's what it was. It was about selling toy soldiers.
Yeah.
100%. All the White Dwarf articles, all the games, all the books. It's all about selling toy soldiers, which had an unfortunate side effect after a while of Games Workshop as it got bigger and narrowed down, and it could only be about toy soldiers that Games Workshop makes. Yeah, the other things are excluded. No, we don't make it. You're not allowed to have it. You can't even mention it in the book.
Just was never here, never was.
Never was. Because we don't make it anymore.
Yeah.
And likewise, Space Marine with plasma cannon who's not a Dark Angel. Don't make that anymore. So nobody else gets plasma cannons anymore. That's being overly literal, but that's where you end up.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
We're away from that now again because we're off into STL territory. We can create resins, we can put things in digital. We could just speculate about things, and we're not bound by having to sell just a range of miniatures.
And also not having 40 years of backstory that you have to
Accumulated,
consider.
yes,
Yeah.
accumulated backstory and miniatures.
Yeah.
That you have to consider about it, because it's always a big deal when you cut something as well, because somebody's got that, and it's like, what do you mean I can't play with my thing anymore? I bought it from you with perfectly good money back in the day 20 years ago. What do you mean I can't use it in the latest edition?
Is it quite freeing? Did you find it to... I mean, obviously you've done a lot of freelance since working in games.
It's one of the joys of freelance is not being bound. I mean, you miss it at times as well. I mean, Gav gets the best and worst of both worlds, because you still work in Black Library and do 40k novels and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it was very freeing. I think there was some materials that needed arranging stuff. Originally, I came in just to kind of turn that into a bit of a world Bible. That was like 2.5 years ago or whatever. So still going 3 years ago nearly. Yeah,
probably.
That's what I was born.
So yeah, absolutely. I think. And for me, it's not just the world, but like I say, some of those things about how we're going to express the set and how we're going to explore it in a modern way without that any kind of assumptions. Some of those assumptions are good, of the way to do things, and some of them like, no, let's revisit them. Why are they done that? And particularly, very much from a product point of view, but also just from what is it point of view. It's like, well, it's 2025. We have all these different avenues open to us of like physical and digital and things like that, but also like. There's never been an easier time in some ways to get a game out, but there's also never been like more competition of games coming out and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
So well, the two go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Like, the easier it is to make, the more people are going to do it.
Yeah.
And
the £300 or £600 gorilla in the room has never been bigger either. So like, well, don't fight the gorilla because that's just silly. But actually, we have lots of experience of like training the gorilla.
Yes.
I suppose.
Yeah,
So
you were
it's
his
like,
mate for
but
us
also
for a
it's
while.
like, but don't just do those things because that's what they do, because that's not necessarily what their success is built on. Their success is built on being a £600 gorilla. And so the idea of like big like tomes that drop 60 quid or whatever and all the rest of it, like, no, we don't have to do that. In fact, it would be really hindering to expect people to have that kind of outlay. So everything's again focused back on the miniatures, terrain, STLs, all those kind of things all come back to that tabletop experience and putting toy soldiers together and playing with toy soldiers.
Yes.
And anything else from that is just to support that, because the main driver from Danny and what we're doing is this isn't a game that's just going to get crowdfunded and hey, we raised £2 million and then get delivered and then everyone forgets about it. It's like, no, this is a game we want people to play. This is a game we want to see in stores in 2 years' time.
Yeah, keep building over the years and doing more stuff.
Danny owns a games and comic shop, so saying as a Debscon, there's nothing he'd like more than in a couple of years' time to walk into somebody else's store and see his game being played, because that's just like that's achieved what he wanted to achieve. It's not because to be fair, games is just the worst way to make cash grabs. It's just like, why would you? But yeah, the investing in because these plastics are being made in the US, all the stuff that we kind of covered possibly in the other videos, but it's like multi-part plastic kits is a massive investment, but that's because it's the best way to do these for a longer term kind of like thing, rather than just okay, we'll pay you, we'll get some molds in China and we'll get it done on the quick. It's like, no, we need the expertise in-house to do the best we can for the next, and that's for this game, and then 3 years from now. So we've got 2 factions on launch. There's 5 factions planned over the first 3 years or so. But after that, do we go back? Do we do other games in the universe? Who knows? But that's, again, we're setting up the setting, the background for that. It could be explored in different ways. Maybe we will end up doing a mass battle game with, like, tiny little Zeos, or a proper spaceship combat game, or whatever. We don't know. But we have to build that groundwork there rather than try and crowbar it in later.
Yeah.
So this is, you've just mentioned mass battles there. One of the key things about this is that this is pitched as a scalable skirmish game. I've played one game basically with the starter stuff. And I mentioned to the guy I was playing with, like, oh, this is intended to scale up. And he looked at me with a mixture of horror and excitement.
Yeah.
Because it was our first game, we were playing quite slow, and it picked up pace as it went.
Yeah.
But is the rule system and the systems in general universal to scale it up, or does it change?
No, it scales pretty directly up.
Okay.
I mean, the systems are the systems, the stats are the stats. Everything runs off the same systems. So you play with more, certainly. It's designed around this idea that each Zeoform has a little supporting team of supports, which can be drones or, troopers or what have you. But they're generally more specialists. It'll be more like a sniper or engineers and things like that. But yeah, you're playing with like 2 or 3 Zeoforms aside, but you can scale up onto a bigger table size, play with more Zeoforms, all the rest of it. There's nothing holding back from it. The way the system works with the turn sequencing, it's kind of agnostic about how many things you use with it.
Yeah.
All that will extend out is your playing time. But there we go. You might argue that comes down again because you've got more destruction capable. So
More explosions.
yes,
less
yes,
things quickly.
yes.
Yeah,
Well, you quickly have less things to play with. It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the scalable part. Is it's not done for a set of miniatures, a preset on it. It's not done to set battle sizes at all. We've got a few suggestions, but that's it. But that's the way I've always done tabletop miniatures games from my perspective, unless it's something very specific like a Necromunda or a Blood Bowl or something like that, where you had a literal team.
Yes.
Yeah, one of the things was because terms carry certain meanings these days. So when you say a skirmish game, for a lot of gamers, they will understand that. It probably means like 6 to maybe a dozen models or whatever, which is what this is. But we wanted scalable. It's definitely not a battle game in that you're not going to be using 60 miniatures, but you can have more than 6 to 12. You could have, especially, you might have 4 or 5 ZAs and maybe 10, 12 supports or whatever.
The fun idea that you can just get more stuff and just add it to your force.
Yeah, so if you have a set of favourite models that you really like, but then you've gone out and bought a new set of models, you can play with them together.
You can just add it together rather than have to boot something out to make it rude.
Yeah, again, my son and I have, through my son particularly, have got into Shatterpoint a bit recently. Again, that's very different because that's a very limited number of models. You have 8 models basically. Really, depending on exactly what you have, and you sub in 4 models for a different 4 models or whatever. Whereas, again, this is not that. This is
Zeogenesis is quite a crunchy game as well because I'm a past believer in that you spend infinitely longer like reading about things and diddling around with stuff than you do actually gaming. Yeah. So complex army lists are actually fine. Different options in terms of skills, components, weaponry, let alone the individual pieces themselves that you're using. So there's a lot of manipulability that you can do in that, a lot of fiddleability, which is followed through because that's the way the miniatures are supposed to work as well, is that, they are yours to build, if you want to slap different weapon systems onto them rather than the presets. Have at it sort of thing. You want to try out these different skills because there's no actual miniature representation of the skills as such. You can. Components are kind of a halfway house where... if you want to have a bit of added protection against energy weapons or something like that, you can have some extra applique armor, but that's something you can convert on your miniature. Yeah, we may or may not supply parts for it, or somebody else may do STLs for it, or whatever. Or you just get cocktail sticks and do it the old-fashioned way. Up to you, buddy. So it's kind of got that built into the idea of that again with the scalable side of things that it's semi-role play sort of manipulable sort of a thing.
Yeah, I think that's possible though because the basic gameplay engine is very elegant.
Yes.
It's like there's a few basic mechanics of how you work things. The D10 dice pool system, you know, it's like I roll against you, you roll against me, and that's it really. And again, the way the activations work. So because we used the combat die with all like the little special effects, and because we've used things like the system down mechanic, which you know, again, takes lots of cool narrative effects, essentially uses a keyword system and then boils down into one in-game marker. It's like we get to do lots of the cool stuff, but without lots of the clutter and lots of the bits that tend to make other games really hard to pick up.
You can build or describe something quite fantastical, but the reality of that in battle is still something that you can just roll for in the mechanic that already exists.
Yeah, it shouldn't hold up your play for too much. This is the idea. You get the effect of it, and you can imagine what's going on.
I love a bit
but there are
of D&D.
sort of like a load of subsystems about it.
Yeah, I love a bit of D&D in that it's always the worst when you come up with something really cool to do and the Dungeon Master's just like, no, you can't do that. And it's like, well, just let me do it. And, you know, I'll roll a D20. It doesn't matter. But just like tell me that that's fine to do.
Well, and it's going back to what we said earlier, you know, like in the 80s, and lots of historical games are very simulationist, and whereas actually this is very much about gameplay. It's not about every single thing being its own specific mechanic that directly represents that. It's about giving you that feeling of how it's like, and again, particularly with that dynamic leaping around, doing lots of cool stuff. It's like, it's making those moments of narrative that are fun that you remember, of like, oh yeah, do you remember that time it set you on fire and you fell off the building at the same time and you died, you know, all those kind of things, but without having to have 14 different mechanics kind of intersecting, or even lots of special rules necessarily. The combat die, I think, is a really good part of that, of just adding sudden. Like, it's that critical hit, it's that sudden bit of narrative that suddenly swings things of where.
And forgive my ignorance, a combat die.
Okay.
We have
one of those ones.
We have a special D10.
Oh, fun.
Right.
They're actually faction based as well, which is another thing we get out of them, because the Guard Corps has their own and the Pact has their own, because they use different kinds of weapon systems. So the Pact one is kind of more energy based. And includes things like malware, tends to set you on fire more often. Whereas the Guard Corps one is a bit more classic military, it's all bullets and explosions and so on. So their combat die will tend to like cause shrapnel or knock people around and things like that. And basically when you make an attack, you'll always roll the combat die with it, and it's an additional result.
Right.
And if they don't manage to block that result from coming through, then it'll do more damage or move things around or cause a system down, like I say. Or whittle away at your kind of like team morale, which is your cohesion. You can lose that from the combat die as well. And it's just this little bit of extra. As Gav says, it actually fills that critical hit. Kind of like,
And the morale system.
And a morale
with the
system.
diffusion
All
results again.
But it's just
Suddenly
there within
it
your
works.
basic rolling.
No, I like that, because we played. Is it Shatterpoint, the Halo thing?
No, it's Halo Flashpoint.
Flashpoint.
It definitely feels like they were
Flash,
late
not
to the
Shatter.
copyright meeting.
20.
I really enjoyed that though at the when we played
With
that.
the headshots and the criticals.
Yeah, for sure. Because that I assume that's essentially what a combat dice is, right? That thing that's like hits and not hits and criticals and.
Yeah, the combat die adds another element to it where you check a table and various effects happen.
Okay, cool.
In Halo, it's a
cool.
lot
Like when you roll for wild magic in D&D.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
But
Flashpoint,
taking
right.
away or not having it be just numbers, I think adds a lot to the narrative when you're playing that kind of game. It gives you like a real physical thing that you can
it's
see.
always an interesting challenge, because you want a balance, right, within a tabletop game of a certain amount of predictability. You should be able to take an action, have a reasonable idea of what the outcome's likely to be.
Do nothing 5 times in a row.
Exactly. But at the same time, you've got to be open for that. The opportunity to excite and entertain at the same time as well. And the combat die does that really well, just by building in a number of like other mechanics just into your general rolling. So it is a neat one. But the dynamics of the activation system help as well, where because it's you alternate activating one model at a time. But you can always interrupt somebody's action by taking a reaction to what they're doing under certain circumstances. So that helps to keep it fresh as well. So you're never just sitting there waiting for somebody to finish their turn with their model. Plus, they're only doing one model at a time. So, you don't have to wait too long to wait before you get back into action.
Yeah, I've never played 40k, but you often describe just like, going off down the road to get a pie and chips.
I'll go to Greg's while someone talks about a dice tray.
Yes.
I described it to you once as I played 3 games of Halo Flashpoint. I played the Final Fantasy TCG. I played some random board game off a shelf in Traveling Man. 2 more games of Final Fantasy. and finished it off with a game of Halo with a pint, while some kids was next to us, still going, oh, fuck.
It just doesn't.
Oh, my mum's here.
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah. But from what we played of this, once I remembered that I could do something in my opponent's activation, like I was just kind of eating crisps and watching him shoot me. And I thought, oh, hang on, no, bring that back. Bring that back. I can shoot back or just dodge out of line of sight, which is refreshing to do. Like the little guys generally only get one activation.
Yeah.
But the Zeos is where that sort of tactical maneuverability comes into it, and the tactical depth, I think, within that.
Yeah, it's funny because it does cost you an activation point to make a reaction, so it can be detrimental. You know, at the end of the day, if you take a reaction, you're just getting one action. Yeah, if you take a full activation, you're usually getting 3, which is a lot. But like for the little guys, okay, they've only got one activation point. But if something is about to shoot them that will kill them,
Yes.
you may as well run for cover.
You've got nothing to lose.
So exactly.
Except maybe the troopers, because they come back.
Yeah, they recycle because they're proper
always
troopers.
exceptions.
There's always more of them.
Yeah.
Just around the corner.
Yeah.
But that's one of the things that's been, again, looking at the rule book from scratch and as little legacy as possible, and all the things we've learned about rule books as trying to combine that first point of contact of learning the game and making it accessible as possible with it's always counted to it as a reference manual for somebody who's been playing lots of games and all the rest of it, but actually deliberately having to point out things that are different from a lot of games. Like, you can do this. Does not work like this. It works like this in this game, because there's only 2 or 3 things, but they're fairly major things. That, you know, there are versions of reactions in lots of games. There are things, but things like the no text. You know, there is no hard turn sequence. There is only activations and regroups. Again and again, like when we're doing demos, that's one of the points we have to make. And again, it's like. And that's been really useful. We've done quite a lot of demos at shows and stuff like that, and you see people interacting with it, and the bits that they just pick up, like the shooting rules and stuff like that, are all pretty straightforward, you know, and the rest of it, especially for anyone who's played any games before. But the bits that they stumble on, like, oh no, okay, hang on, that means that I don't. No, that's right, you don't have to do this. You do this, or oh, no, you can't do that, but you can do this kind of stuff.
The ambient bookkeeping or lack thereof that people are just used to.
And also just about flexibility in you too. It's like when you activate something, say you activate, you've got a choice of activation modes, okay, in the game. The classic one being run and gun mode. And that gives you 3 actions, sure. It gives you 2 moves and a shoot action, yeah. But you can take them in any order.
Yes.
So, you know, you could dodge out, shoot, dodge back. And people always sort of like have to double check, it's like, is that okay? Did I have to like end my move before I fire and things like that? Because that's what they've been trained for by many other games.
When presented with something fun, they immediately ask, hang on.
Yes, there must be limitations on my fun. Where are they? Yes.
Yeah, and the charge is a good one as well, because that's 4. You get a snapshot at the start, and you get 2 moves, and you get like a fight, and then but each of those actions is independent. So you assess and do your snapshot, and then depending on how that goes, you can decide what to do with your moves, and then depending on how it goes, you will get a fight. So it's not like I pick this target and I'm going to shoot and charge towards them. It's just like, no, I snapshot and it happens to be that trooper over there. I get 2 moves, which actually moves me into this guy over here. You know, it's not. It's not.
And there's a lot of that. Like, do I have to pick my charge target? It's like, no, you don't. You know.
Yeah. See how the first shot goes, and then pick for your charge to do it.
Just trying to put everything we can into a rulebook that eases that, you know, that accessibility, that ramp of this game. It plays like this, and just running people through simple exercises.
And there aren't any hidden depths we're not telling you about. It really is all here. You know.
Yeah.
When you say it's not turn-based, it is still turn-based, I assume, to an extent.
Kind of. I mean, the way it works is you alternate activating models. Yeah. Each time you activate, costs you an activation point. Little guys generally have 1. Big guys generally have 2. Once you're out of activation points, then what? You have to take a regroup turn. You get to activate no models for your turn, and then you get all your activation points back as a result of that. But in the meantime, of course, if you've got an uneven number of models, or somebody's gone first, whatever, the other person keeps activating. They may not have run out of models. They may not be regrouping for a while yet. Again, it kind of depends on how much you've been reacting.
Yeah. Okay.
So you just have to take a little pause, basically. Now, in a full game, when you're playing with objectives, are a big part of the game. When you regroup, that's when you assess how are we doing as a force. How are we succeeded in our mission today? Will there be a bonus involved for everybody, or not? And you check your cohesion, and you also take a penalty to your cohesion for every objective you're not currently holding. Okay, so in other words, it starts to tank your cohesion as you regroup. The more times you do it, the more times it tanks your cohesion. When you run out of cohesion, you all go home. You're done. Contract done. Unable to fulfill contract, whatever. So there is a tension in that of like, you don't want to be regrouping too early, or maybe you do. Who knows? Maybe you can take that better than they can.
Maybe they're about to take up 2 objectives off you.
Yes, and maybe now is the time to regroup. God damn it! Because the dynamics of the 2 forces, I mentioned that they're different on the combat die. They're different in their units and the models they can take as well. One of which is like your cohesion comes from the models you take. Each model is worth a certain amount of cohesion. Packed models are generally worth a bit less cohesion than Guardcore ones are. They tend to be quite chunky on cohesion front because they're proper formal military. They've got ranks and everything.
Not so easily phased.
Well, and they're disciplined and organised.
And prepared for this kind of thing. And also it's to do with their tech that the energy weapons tend to run out a bit faster. They're more of a drain, basically, on the Zeo forms to use them. Conversely, though, the other kind of like soft mechanic we've got in there, cohesion's one of them. The other one's impetus, which is basically like command points. Free extra activation points is all impetus is. Marvellous. Stave off those regroups as much as you like. And Pact generally have more of them. They're more individualist. They're more used to working on their own and taking the initiative when they need to. So they generally have more impetus. And that's the balance off factor about, how big is your force? How often do you have to regroup? How much can you afford to react? How much impetus can you burn? How much cohesion damage can you take along the way? Because obviously if you lose models as well, their cohesion comes straight off too.
So again, there's a little bit of like, I always liked one of my favourite bits, funny enough, from Battlefleet Gothic was always the fact that you could evacuate crippled cruisers because it's better to get something that's damaged off and repaired than something that's destroyed altogether. And the VP difference was quite considerable because I think it was like a quarter for...
It was 25% if you disengage.
And 100% obviously of their value if they were properly destroyed. And so there's a similar sort of thing here of like actually...
We don't want you fighting to the death.
Sometimes getting that guy out of the way and just surviving for until your next regroup and the next objective or whatever, or getting that mechanic, getting that engineer over there to restore defense and stuff, rather than I might as well go down swinging. It's like because it doesn't matter. It's like it does matter.
No, it's nice to. It's so great to give a kind of a narrative reason, a way to role play, like you say, about your faction and what you might wish to save and what you're willing to risk and all of this, build that into the mechanics. I love that about Flashpoint, actually, in that you respawn like it's a video game. So that means you absolutely can run in, absolute balls to the wall.
Weirdly, the opposite of every skirmish game I've ever played. It's like, well, we have an objective to do. The death count doesn't matter. Plus, if I get this guy killed, I can respawn him behind the enemy.
Sometimes there's an advantage to respawning a character, but that works so beautifully in the world of Halo, where obviously respawning is something that you do all the time.
Yes, video game rules apply.
I'm also just sitting here thinking about how you even come up with all that stuff. Did you have just a really big flow chart that you start with and trying to design all of these things together, or?
Yeah, in terms of, and
how do you start?
I'll bolt onto that as well. How do you make something that feels fresh to you in terms of trying to get a new
in this case, get somebody else to
in this case, I actually had a leg up on that one because Danny had previously employed a friend of mine, Ryan Miller, who's another designer, to do the initial work on what would become, didn't even have a name at that point, what would become Zeogenesis. And he'd come up with that basic system, the turn sequence I was just talking about, was core to that, and using D10s, he'd argue Danny down from using D20s because that would be madness. But he's still using D10s. So I have that kind of thing, and that isn't something I would ever have done. It's a very kind of board gamey mechanic to have that free-flowing turn sequence where the game turns only over when it's actually over, rather than it's like, Now we will all have the shooting
Well,
phase.
like I say, almost when you're writing those rules and start doing longhand, the first thing you work out is the turn sequence. Like, actually, we're going to have the radical thing is we're going to have combat before movement and then shooting, and then end
It's like,
phase. You know, you almost
I'll
always
put morale
'cause you
checks first.
You just know
that's-
there'll be an end phase some point because you're going to have to clear up some counters or do something. So you almost, like say you kind of
You tend to structure from that, and at the end of the day, I've been doing tabletop miniature games for 30 years, so I fall into doing similar patterns.
Yes.
But I had straight away that a really fresh way of looking at things. Oh, that's really interesting. So I kept that on board and kind of built into it more and put the cohesion and the impetus in there to make it matter more as well.
Yeah.
And work with the reactions because he had basic reactions in there, and I kind of work with them as well to make them matter more because I like what he'd got going on because I was very aware of what Danny had been saying about it's anime manga, and I play Armored Core. I know what speedy mechs look like, and I was trying to replicate that kind of an effect. So in this particular case, we had a bumper bonus on the start with it.
A nice little starter pack.
Yeah, but that's it. I imagine that was great for you to come in looking to design this and having this thing that was new and interesting to you that you could then build on, bring the expertise you have and things that you've done in the past and say, how can I apply these to this with this new kind of twist?
It's game development is the way we always think about it as opposed to design. So it was a development job in that regard, but there were a lot of things to do around the peripherals for that. But it gave you a start for 10, definitely. Nice. In a general sense, when you're doing this kind of thing, you go back to like, well, what are we showing here? Are we showing big armies clashing? Are we showing speedy individuals fighting? Are we showing warships? What? And that'll tell you a certain amount about how to divide up the action. Okay. For a big army, it may be appropriate to have something more like a command phase, where you give out orders to your forces and so forth, and then they enact them. That may be more appropriate for more man-to-man combat sort of thing. Just picking someone and go. May be the right thing.
No, super interesting stuff.
Yeah, the game I played was fun.
Yeah, we should play it.
We should play.
we should play it. Yeah.
I should play.
Yeah. Let's do it now. Ignore
Let's
these guys.
do it. Yeah, we can do it with these, right?
Yeah. The last thing I really wanted to touch on was a lot of the fun we had with it was. I play a lot of Stargrave, so I'm used to kind of narrative stuff and just kind of house ruling. Like, we'll say that thing exploded and you can walk through it now. But when I presented my friend, who is generally, he's moved to one-page rules now. He was a 40k guy. When I said to him, okay, my mech is going to attempt to run through this wall. Sorry, not mech. Large armor suit.
Zeoform. Just
Zeoform.
use Zeoform.
That's even cooler, yeah. He's going to run through this wall and attempt to melee the guys on the other side. And he just looked at me like, you run through the wall? You run through the wall, no problem. And then he gets a melee at the end.
So I always talk about, sort of like what's the image, what's the narrative? And actually, things smashing through walls is very anime. Yes. So if you couldn't smash through walls, you wouldn't be able to recreate that favourite scene.
Yes.
And that's a lot of what we did, our previous, most recent experience working together was on the Warlord Games 2000 AD licensing. So a lot of that was going back to the original strips and saying, what's all the cool shit happens in the strips?
It's happening in comics.
So I want to do that on the tabletop. And so although this is a fictional background, the setting of the 100 Suns is kind of new and all the rest of it, those images of a thing jumping off a building with a flaming katana and chopping the thing in half, or, like I say, scooting around the corner firing a gun with sparks, or doing the Akira slide on a bike, whatever it might be, are the things that you want people to be able to imagine doing in the game. And they may not be, like Akira slide mechanic, because that's not necessarily, thing, but actually going through walls is a necessary mechanic because you can't normally do it. Destructible terrain, blowing lines of sight for your big stuff, being able to smash a building with your spider tank was definitely things that we knew people would want to do because it's stuff we wanted to do, and that are in the they're in the comics, they're in the shows.
I think that's your sales pitch to me for the game is smash a building with a spider tank.
Well, we went for scalable skirmish, but smash a building with a spider tank was up there.
I think I talked about this with you, Andy, when you first came in. I go to Japan now and again, and I discover things there that I just didn't know existed. Specifically, it's always stuff from the 70s or 80s, where I think, that's ripped off Star Wars, that. Oh, wait, that came out in 1974.
Wait a minute.
Hold up. Wait, that's before Battlestar Galactic. Hold up. 1 second now. And you find out it's much older than you ever thought. And then you kind of retroactively look at everything you've built your entire personality and character on and realise, oh, that's just berserk.
Am I weeb?
Am I just a weeb?
Was I a weeb the whole time?
George Lucas, the ultimate weeb?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Makes sense.
And I've had the conversation with Jordan Sorcery, which is the greatest name ever.
That's great. Jordan Sorcery.
Jordan Sorcery.
Yeah,
Lovely
shout
lad.
out.
Shout out, big man, yes. And we were kind of looking at specifically Warhammer models and thinking, that's just Evangelion. That's interesting.
It must be said, Jez Goodwin was a big fan.
Yes. But even stuff like, I picked up, second wankiest sentence of the day, I picked up Battleship Yamato on Laserdisc.
Yeah. Oh, Laserdisc, nice.
Yeah. And thought, that looks a lot like the cover to Battlefleet Gothic.
Might have had a little bit of inspiration coming on from there.
Yeah. But it's kind of, I think it's known between you guys where all your inspirations come from. But to us on the outside, it's kind of, weirdly, when we were talking about it, it was like we'd never thought of it before. I'm like, where does the inspiration come from? So in terms of, obviously this is an anime-inspired game.
Yes.
How deep do you feel that anime influence has run over the last 30 years in terms of your general output, not just in Games Workshop, but in other stuff, not just stylistically, but narratively?
It varies from project to project. So for some things, it's just not appropriate. It's just a style that doesn't that kind of clashes, particularly with looking at 40k. Basically, as a kid, I was able to watch Robotech on cable TV at 6:30 on Saturday mornings when everyone else was like watching Transformers or whatever. I was watching Robotech, and that just kind of wired into my brain. That and Saturday night main event wrestling at 6:30 in the evening essentially created my love for big robots
and wrestling and robots wrestling.
Well, I still haven't done the robots wrestling game, and at some point the two have to meet. So it's been very influential.
Make it happen. We'll do it for this. We'll do a Zeo wrestling.
We could definitely do the Zeo wrestling game. There's a little bit. There is a pit fighting. There's a little bit of a pit fight in the comic. I've always had that. I think it's one of the things that did draw me to Adeptus Mechanicus. It's definitely one of the things that drew me to the Eldar, and because again, it's a different kind of anime aesthetic and things. But I think the thing is, for inspirations, it's never that one thing. One, there's all the things that you don't remember that are already still influencing you. So it's easy to say, well, these were my kind of touchstones for this, or these 5 different things, because you forget the other 5 things that you were behind those, or like you say, you weren't really aware of at the time, but influenced those. And I think it's very hard to do anything new, but what you can do is strive to do something unique. Yeah, I think anyone who says that this is completely new and I wasn't influenced by anything and it just sprang, it's like, well, were you just in a white room for 20 years and then just came out and imagined stuff? And the chances are you'll just imagine stuff. Even then you'll be like, oh, you imagine the same thing as the person 2 doors over because you just came down a similar pipe. Yeah, absolutely. So everything's always an iteration and it's always been influenced by what comes before. And the point is to try and add a different influence in, or at least just make it
your own.
Make it your own,
yeah. Not just a copy of something else, but something inspired by it. That's the operative term here. It's the inspiration, and it's. We were talking about it earlier on that it's a huge influence on Gav. Less so on me because I'm a little bit older and I didn't grow up with Robotech cartoons on Saturday mornings. But I did grow up with 2000 AD and things like BattleTech and stuff like that. And that's already sort of like second tier influence from things like Robotech, because the early BattleTech in particular was all just straight up lifts from Japanese anime robot designs. And then eventually they got taken away from them because of copyright reasons. And we saw just how appalling the West's approach to big robot designs was. It's like, oh, that's really boring now. Which was also an education in and of itself very early on. Stuff like Space Battleship Yamato, sorry. Again, I didn't see the full anime for it until a few years back, actually. But I saw images of it and I saw plastic kits of it as well, because they would pop up in model shops and things like that. You get this like little weirdy selection. I'm like, oh, what the hell's that from? Always intrigued, always inspired to a large extent. And like I say, knowing Jez over my time at Workshop in particular, he was always very inspired by specifically the big Gundam kits and things like that. And just the sheer artistry and how they were put together out of injection molded plastic, because we were getting to terms with what that meant at the time.
I keep forgetting that those existed basically almost in their current form in 85.
Exactly. And, you know, compared to what was being produced at the time here, they were decades ahead, absolutely decades ahead. You know, they were posable and all this sort of stuff, and little flexible tubes and so on. Amazing pieces of kit. Not directly related to the tabletop arena per se, but still huge inspiration for it.
I suppose it's the indirect influence as well. So I when people say, like I just did a recent convention Q&A, and people would say kind of what inspires your cinematography style, and I would say Mamoru Oshii, Pat Labor, Ghost in the Shell.
Right, yeah.
And there's nothing specifically anime in front of the lens, but the fact that I had some ambient jazz playing and I lingered for 20 seconds on a shot of a rattle can before I picked it up is very Ghost in the Shell.
Yeah.
Like, just take a breath, absorb the environment a bit, and in turn that's taken from
Which is
True
great
French
for
Studio
YouTube
Waves.
engagement.
It certainly is. Yeah. But I guess it's you absorb some stuff at the time, and it just sort of sticks with you.
Yeah.
Vibes with you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You're trying to recreate that vibe.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, Evangelion, like I say, was a for some of us was a big splash at the time in the studio, and we were watching it as it was being released and all the rest of it, and chatting about it on our smoke breaks and whatever else and stuff. So, but at the same time, there isn't anything necessarily directly in 40k about, you know, kids being wedged into giant robots and forced to fight.
Yes.
But some of the concepts of, you know, like, well, actually, Eldar are powered by unwilling spirits and all the rest of it. And there's so yeah, depending on how abstract you get, you know, everything's the same. But there are certainly influences that aren't just visual. I think, you know, there's like I say, yeah, there are narrative styles. There are different ways of telling stories. Which
It's also the potentiality that you could do things like this.
Yeah.
You know, we were just like kids from England at the end of the day. We don't know anything about Japan or what the hell people are doing in Japan or what they find cool. But getting exposed to that, you go, oh wow, you can do that. It's perfectly allowed.
Yeah.
I think that's why it's an interesting question, because I think with Games Workshop being this British thing, and with it, like, to me, I don't know much about anime or Warhammer, but I'd never put the two together if you just showed them to me, because one thing is one thing in my head and one thing is another.
Well, to a certain extent, they've striven to come apart and be their own things.
Yeah. But I think it's interesting to know that they're, at the very least, you were exposed to that at the time, and that did, at least, was rattling around in your brain while you're coming up with these things and drawing those parallels.
I'd encourage anybody to, you know, expose yourself to different things.
100%.
You know, in a nice, safe environment, of course, face. But different influences, like, because you never know what you might get on with, you never know what you might vibe with.
Yeah.
And there is a danger of just like, oh, this is the thing. And sure, you will produce examples of that thing until the end of time.
Yeah.
You need to get outside of that particular box at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I very much look back at my teenage years, and like anyone starting creating is like we all learn stuff by copying. That's what we do. Is we do tracing, we copy, we like, you know, the first fantasy I wrote was all just bad token rip-offs. You know, the first maps I drew were just like Middle Earth, all that kind of stuff. And we just but you reiterate on other people's stuff until you learn what your own thing is. And I think that's the important thing. But what goes into the machine, what goes into those iterations, that creativity has to be from a broad selection of stuff. Yeah. You know, so like, for me, 2000 AD, Warhammer at the time. But but even wrestling, even, you know, say Robotech, but then reading, you know, David Gemmell or Isaac Asimov, which are like two, again, polar opposites in terms of types of fiction and things. All of that enabled me to then create a voice and a creativity that was my own.
Yes.
Hopefully, to this day, and then keep topping it up. I think that's the important thing as well. You're still continuing, being the sponge,
continue the search. You know,
And this has definitely been one of those projects of like, I say, because we've been in the, maybe not the ground floor, but at least the first floor onwards. You know, it's been a chance to exercise some of that stuff. Because you squirrel away ideas that will never get used until they get used.
That's not for here, you know. That's a great idea, but it doesn't fit here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
Yes. You're welcome.
It's been a really, really interesting conversation.
Yeah.
I the world of narrative construction and game development and design. It like even aside from the tabletop of it all, I think it's really interesting conversations, and it's really interesting to get your guys' insight on that, considering you've been doing it since I was born.
I know. Honestly, we're in a golden age for it right now. The sheer accessibility of information. Stuff like that.
And all these digital tools as well. So the only other thing I didn't get around to asking was, all these digital tools are super interesting. I imagine they must be game-changing for you to be able to use those and the freedom that gives you as well.
It depends on what kind of digital tool you're talking about.
Well, yeah.
Some of them are just a pain in the arse.
Yeah.
Some of them are super useful.
I mean, this project. I mean, this is a devolved studio. We don't go into one place and work together. So
there's that.
So this literally would not exist without like being able to operate across the world. One of our sculptors in the Philippines, the other one's in Spain.
Yeah.
Main ones, Danny's based in
North Carolina. Sorry.
And being able to scan, like STLs of models in progress and comment them.
And document share
and then,
as well.
Or 3D print them. So again, we've got these here because these, didn't have to be couriered. Some of these were, but again, locally 3D printed, and then we can look at them and put them together and go, oh, that's really big. That needs more stats, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, quite.
Usually that
supposed to be. That's another gun, isn't it? Yeah.
But that wasn't on the original list of guns.
Yeah, so there's some tremendous tools, and what I meant was it was just like being able to look at other things out there, and find them. Whatever your source material for it being, it's all right out there. You used to have to go and find a book, or a magazine with it, or go and see a movie. Now it's all there, right there.
As you've mentioned, with a clip of a robot skidding around a building and sparks come off its feet. If you wanted that back in the day, you had to go into Virgin Megastore
or find somebody who knew what you were talking about and could go, oh yeah, and they were in short supply, man.
Yeah. But now there's 50 different clips of it in different languages.
Absolutely.
On YouTube, so yeah. There you go.
You can make your own animation clip just like that in a relatively short period of time. It wouldn't be hard.
But even more obvious things like these miniatures aren't in production yet. There they fucking are. And possibly even that one came out of that machine there. Is possibly as an example.
But possibly,
this is it. Danny, God bless him, he's had to learn from the ground up, basically, about doing. No. He's found sculptors for them, but he's had to learn about how to do plastic injection molding from not knowing anything about it. By the machines, find out what the plastics are necessary and get them all wired into his little factory and get molds cut and So it's taken years to get to the point, but he's now just got to the point where he's doing actual plastic shots.
You see,
first few test shots.
Self-producing.
That's the thing.
That was his point, is that he didn't want to just make something that he made in China. He wanted to establish a business that could make its own plastic.
Machines up close. We've seen how long it takes to sculpt those steel molds.
We were doing the first production mold for one of the Stormer Zeos. These are slight variants that don't quite look like that now, but was being cut while we were in Adepticon. So we have production mold should be done now.
Yeah,
assuming, because again, that's one of the things. It's a bit like for all the advanced technology. That's something you set off, and then 16 hours later you find out whether it worked, and then you go.
Yeah, it's a bit like 3D.
That's after that's after the 10 hours of the first rough cut. This is the polishing cut and the 0.2 mil cut or whatever, and like that. And then you got to go. Back in the day of like set to print and realise, or code these days, is like, I didn't close the brackets on that, so everything's come out bold. So it's still still nerve wracking, but it's and that's why ready to that coinciding with the Game Found launch next month is not a coincidence. It's like we can do the production, good. We can press the big button, we're ready to go. And that's the idea. And the idea is it'll be delivered in December.
Yes.
So shipped from the US. So, but it's slightly variable times at the moment, but we won't get into
that. Brilliant. Well, just derailed the outro there, but
sorry.
That's all right. No, that was all me.
It's like Lord of the Rings. We can have 3 endings. We're going to do Scour in the Shire now.
We'll take one of the cameras outside, and then we'll slow motion Andy, and then we'll all start crying, and then you get on a boat or some shit, and then we'll take you back to.
Or it could be like Evangelion. We could do these 2 films later to try and explain the end.
Yes. Please. Yeah. I'm good with that. There's 2 extra soundtrack CDs. I got more music out of it. I'm good. Yeah. But yeah, thank you. I'm actually going to look at a camera for once now.
Probably that one.
Now we're all looking at
that one. Middle one. Everyone stare at the middle one.
Thank you for joining us, Andy and Gav. Thank you also for joining us. Thank you to the lovely boys at the Painting Phase for lending us their room and letting us fuck up your white balances on all your
cameras.
Yes,
And touch their toys.
and touch their toys. Yeah, thank you for leaving those within reach. That was really helpful because I didn't bring mine. So if people want to learn more about Zeogenesis, where can they go?
To the website.
Yeah, Zeogenesis.com or search Zeogenesis on GameFound.
Zeogenesis on GameFound. Yeah, I will bang some links down below. Give that campaign a follow. It is free to follow the free-to-follow campaign. Yeah, no shit.
And if you follow and then back, you will get a free Stormer Zeo.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's also a campaign you can if you subscribe on My Mini Factory as well for a free STL for Stormer and all the weapon variants and stuff.
Amazing. Wicked.
Nice.
This one.
There you go. Do that.
Do that. And we will see you next time.
Bye-bye.
The wrong wave. Come on.
The chump change wave.